Welcome to episode 28 of our reflections on the Psalms. And if you remember, last time in the last episode, we talked about David reflecting on the valley of the shadow of death. And we reflected there how David had some kind of a source of strength and reassurance and safety. And we didn't quite fully answer that in the last episode because it's this verse 5, that really answers that. Because David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, and kind of stops it there. And of course, the question you're left asking is, why do you not feel any evil? Why do you not sense a sense of dread? At the end of the day, the valleys were such foreboding and intimidating places. Surely any reasonably minded person would feel a sense of anxiety and panic. Well, David gives the answer in verse 5. This is what he says. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Two things going on there. First thing is David makes a statement. His statement is very simple. I fear no evil because you are with me. That's a powerful statement. And it reflects very much the understanding of the ancient Hebrews, as we'll see in a moment. But then he further unpacks that, if you like, and defines it even more clearly when he says your rod and your staff, and he keeps that shepherd metaphor going and uses an illustration of two aspects of a shepherd's life that are key to the shepherd protecting his sheep. Now think about this. A sheep is it's kind of like, Bailey says it's got a special problem, a sheep, because he's got no sense of defenses. Think about every other animal you know, even down to the domestic cats and dogs. Cats have claws and teeth, and I've seen my dog and my cat. We have one of each. Sometimes, very rarely, they come to blows. And when they come to blows, that cat's got some sharp claws to defend itself. The dog's got some sharp teeth to have a go back. And the two of them match each other, and more often than not, the dog comes out the loser. Think about bears, think about tigers. Bears can claw and scratch and crush, and tigers can roar and rip with the claws and the teeth. And it seems like so many animals have a defense mechanism that whenever it's called into play, you can guarantee they will be there. But the sheep, I don't know what a sheep's got really. I don't know what a sheep fights with. It seems that the only security a sheep has is the proximity to the shepherd. As long as the shepherd's around, they'll be relatively protected. You remember we talked about when a sheep gets lost, it just bleats. It bleats hoping it will be found. It has no kind of sense of survival mechanism. And I think that when David writes this, of course, he's appreciating that sheep find their security in the shepherd. A lion may find its security in its strength or its claws, and the cat may find security in its claws or whatever it is that it uses to defend itself. But sheep are different. But I think it highlights a very significant thing in life, and that is this. We all root our security into something. For some people, it's their savings, it's their pension. For other people, it's the security of their family. For other people, it's their job. It's the prestige they gain from their job. To others, it's their partner. And still others, it may just be the strength and the connectedness they feel in the community they're in. Whatever it is, we draw security from somewhere. Now, here's the problem. Wherever we place our security, and have to think about that, because where you feel that sense of that's okay, I'll be all right there, that is an indication of your security. When people worry about money and think I've got savings, I feel okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief, that's an indication of where their security is lying. When they get anxious and they think my family are going to be around me if anything happens, there is a mark of their security. If they feel kind of like that their life is getting pointless, well, I know my job will continue to test me. Therein lies my security. But for sheep, none of those things are relevant. And the problem with all of those things is that none of them are flawless and perfect and impervious to even fluctuation, never mind failure. Some of these things may not completely crash. Our family may not abandon us, and our job may not end, and our finances may not dwindle to nothing immediately overnight, but they are given to fluctuate. Things are given to change, and in that change, of course, what happens? Oftentimes we stumble, or sometimes we become overwhelmed, and I think particularly when people closest to us let us down, there's a huge element of disillusion. The people we thought were solid, suddenly we realize they're not as solid as we thought they were. And this can be a really disturbing appreciation in life. And so I think that when we look at these things, we have to sort of try and root back to what David is saying. What happens when the Lord is your shepherd? When the Lord is the center of your security? When something that self-declares itself as a changeless element. So, God says to Malachi, I am the Lord, I change not. That inability of God to fluctuate, to let us down, to have a bad day, if you like. And so when you take all these things together, what you find is that the verse itself, for you comfort me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The verse is a kind of reflects something of what some theologians have called the incarnational understanding of the ancient Hebrews about the presence of God with them. Now you can root this back to Genesis when you read the opening parts of Genesis, where it tells us that God walked with man in the garden and communed with him on a regular basis. Now that sounds so easy to say, and props to our 21st century Western ears. It's like, yeah, well, we know God is with us. But that was a very unusual understanding to the ancient Hebrew, because a lot of the ancient religions, the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and all Babylonians and all these others, did not believe in a God that was kind of close to you or involved in your kind of day-to-days, if you like. They actually believed the gods were quite remote and had to be appealed to, or somehow kind of appeased with sacrifices and one thing and another. The idea of a God mixing in with your day-to-day was a very unusual thing, a very unique understanding. If you flick forward a bit to Deuteronomy 4, you get this wonderful statement made in verse 7, and it's an incredibly powerful, almost revolutionary statement. It says, what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? That is a remarkable statement, isn't it? The writer says, what other nation can boast of a God who is so near to them? The idea that God was actually intricately involved in our everyday was a common understanding for a Hebrew. It was a very remote, weird, unusual understanding for so many other nations that surrounded Israel. In that wonderfully classic Psalm 139, David unpacks these words in verses 7 to 10. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. The understanding, of course, was that God was literally everywhere we were. That God was involved in everything that we engaged in life. Now, this brings it to a wonderful culmination when you get to Matthew in the first chapter in the 23rd verse, when God says of Jesus, you shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. It's a culmination of all those thoughts, and Bailey makes the point that Matthew 1:23, that Emmanuel, God is with us, is profoundly related to Psalm 23 and verse 4. For you are with me, David says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. To finish this little episode, we need to look at these two words, rod and staff, because we read them and often just think of a very typical shepherd picture and think, well, that's nice. It's just David saying that God as a shepherd is with us. But the rod was often not something that was just, I used to think of the rod as just an old kind of crooked stick, if you like, that the shepherd used to balance himself, and then the staff would be kind of the traditional hook stick, and that would be the shepherd. But the rod was often seen as a weapon to the Middle Eastern shepherds, much more than just a harmless stick. In fact, Bailey makes this, it was the shepherd's primary offensive weapon for protecting the flock from the enemies, be that wild animals or even humans trying to steal some of the sheep. And it imposed a kind of an intimidating picture. It was said that the rod was probably about 2.5 foot long, if you can imagine. It was a mace-like object. You ever seen these old kind of medieval fighting scenes with the mace, with the long kind of handled weapon and the ball at the end with all the spikes on it. It was a little bit like that. It had embedded in its head pieces of iron. And scripture says how this was often used as an instrument to protect against thieves and animals. Now, you get a picture of that. You remember when David is confronted by Saul about to go into battle with Goliath, and David, in his defense and justification for wanting to fight the giant, informs Saul that as a shepherd, he's fought off lions and bears. And you can only imagine that the rod was the weapon that David would have used, which was far away from just being a stick. It was a pretty formidable weapon. In fact, it's been noted that the term a rod of iron, which you find in Psalm 2 and verse 9, and again in Revelations 2:27 and 12:5, was very much a picture that rests on the image of the shepherd's rod, or the shepherd's mace, if you like, this kind of heavy iron-driven head weapon that they used. But there was another reason, another usefulness for that rod. Not only was it an obvious weapon for offense, for protection, but in Leviticus 27:32, it implicates the rod being used as something very differently. It was often held horizontally across the opening of the sheep pen, and as the sheep passed under it, they could only get under one at a time, and it enabled the shepherd to count them in, if you like, to ensure that none of them had gone missing or none of them were hurt somewhere and therefore lost. And so the rod became a twofold object. One, it was for an instrument for protection, but it was also an instrument for security. You put those things together and think about what David says. He says, I fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So the rod to David was, one, God would protect me against danger, however formidable that danger is, i.e. a lion or a bear. And secondly, I've got the security of knowing that I am found and I am kept and I am belonged in a place because God is constantly watching over my comings and goings. And then David says, your staff, which traditionally was a long stick, probably about 5 feet long. It's more the traditional picture we get of a shepherd with the kind of crooked head at the end, if you like. And unlike a rod, the staff was really used to lift the sheep from dangerous spots or lift them from being straying and kind of draw them back into line. It would be placed under the front legs of a sheep around its neck and just used to guide them back into safety, of course. And again, you get the idea that the staff itself was very much used to kind of guide, to protect, to steer, to nurture. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't primarily something that, would have said it was a comfort or a security thing. But combining these two images together, David is saying, this is how I feel secure. This is what it means to have God with me. On the one side, he will protect me against things that I am unable to combat. On the other side is the security, the safety of knowing that I am found and in a good place with him. And then on the staff side, if I wander, if I stray, it was so designed, the shepherd's crook, that it wasn't a hurtful object. It wasn't a beating the sheep back into the path where it should be going, but a gentle around the neck or arm or front legs, just lifting it back onto the path that it should have been going. And you've got to combine these pictures. David is saying, I'm lost in the valley of the shadow of death, but I can fear no evil. He's thinking of the worst place to be. And if you were a Middle Eastern shepherd, valley of the shadow of death was a pretty scary, formidable place. And so David puts himself in the worst place imaginable and then finishes by saying, but even in the worst place, I'm not talking about just a bad day or a difficult moment. I'm talking about a horrendous place. And to us, we may equate that with receiving a diagnosis, with receiving terrible news about our family, with potential bankruptcy, or, places that seriously alter our lives in many intricate ways. David says, put yourself in that worst place. He said, and I can genuinely say I fear no evil. Why? Because I have an incarnational understanding. I have a God who is with me. I have a God who travels in every intimate moment of my day. He's in the details of 24/7. And he's a God who, he has the wherewithal, he has the resource to protect and to keep me secure and to guide and lift me back on track when I stray. This is a wonderful, powerful sense of incredible security that we carry with God. We should have no fears. We should have no deep ingrained anxiety, because we can, Philippians says, you cast all your care upon the Lord, for he cares for us and he will lead us and guide us. And my encouragement to you today is to just draw something from these wonderful lines of David. You are with me, your rod, your staff, they comfort me, they guide me, they protect me. And as we do that, as we embrace these things, I'm sure we can combat a great deal of the anxieties and the pains that we go through. God bless you.